Notwithstanding the power and wealth of Taxila in ancient days, the information we possess regarding its history is singularly meager, being drawn in the main from the accounts of Greek or Chinese writers, or laboriously pieced together with the help of coins and a few rare inscriptions. The name of the city was Taxila or Taxila, which in Greek and Roman writers was transcribed as Taxila. The foundation of the earliest city goes back to a very remote age. In the Mahabharata, it is mentioned in connection with the great snake sacrifice of King Janamejaya, by whom it had been conquered. Later on, about the beginning, that is to say, of the 5th century before our era, it was probably included in the Achaemenid Empire of Persia, for the inscriptions of Darius at Persepolis and on his tomb, meaning probably the city of Ent stone. The name of Taxila in Tibetan is Dojog, meaning Ent stone. Parthian calls it Chushashilo or the severed head, adding in explanation thereof that Buddha bestowed his head in alms at this place. The more important references to Taxila in Indian literature have been collected by Deschi Shvi Sukhihankar. At Nakshi Rustam make mention of a new Indian satrapy, which was regarded as the richest and most populous in the empire, and which, being distinct from Arya, Arachosia and Gandharia, may be assumed to have comprised Sindh and a considerable part of the Punjab east of the Indus. An interesting relic of Persian influence at Taxila is an inscription in Aramaic characters of the 4th or 5th century BCE, the only Aramaic record that has yet been found in India. That Taxila at this time and during the centuries immediately following enjoyed a great reputation as a university town, famous for the arts and sciences of the day, is evident from numerous passages in the Buddhist Jatakas. But apart from this fact, virtually nothing is known of its history prior to the invasion of Alexander the Great. That Arch descended on the Punjab and received the submission of Taxila in the spring of 300 Sankan, 26 BC, halting there for some weeks preparatory to his attack on Porus. From the extant accounts of Alexander's expedition, based on the writings of his own companions or contemporaries, we learn that the city was then very wealthy, populous and well-governed, and that its territories extended from the Indus to the Hydaspes. We learn too that polygamy and the practice of Safi were in vogue, that girls too poor to be wedded were exposed for sale in the marketplace, and that the bodies of the dead were thrown to the vultures. The reigning king Ambi, known to the Greeks as Omphis or Taxils, was at war not only with the powerful kingdom of Porus, on the further side of the Jhelum, but with the neighboring hill state of Abhisara, and it was no doubt in the hope of securing Alexander's help against these foes that he sent an embassy to wait upon the Macedonian at Udabanda, and led out his troops in person from Taxila, in order to place them at the service of the conqueror, afterwards entertaining him with lavish hospitality at the capital, and providing a contingent of 5,000 men for the expedition against Porus. In return for these and other friendly acts, Ambi was confirmed in the possession of his own territories and rewarded by the accession of new ones, while his position was further strengthened by a reconciliation with Porus. The Macedonian conquest of northwestern India was a splendid achievement, but its effects were short-lived. Alexander had intended the permanent annexation of the northwest, and for that purpose he left colonies and garrisons behind him to consolidate what he had won. But within 6 years of his death, which took place in 323 BCE, Eudemus, the Greek governor, withdrew from the Indus Valley with all the forces he could muster to assist Eumenes against Antiochus, and about the same time, or perhaps even earlier, Chandragupta drove out the Greek garrisons east of the Indus and proceeded to incorporate Taxila and the other states of the Punjab into the empire of Magadha. Then followed, about 305 BCE, the transient and ineffective invasion of Seleucus Nicator, who sought to reconquer the lost possessions of Nicator Alexander, but was reduced to making a hasty and humiliating peace with Chandragupta, under the terms of which all the old Macedonian provinces, as far as the Hindu Kush, were ceded to the Indian monarch. To the states of the Punjab, the iron hand of Chandragupta must have proved as oppressive as that of the Greeks before him. And when his son Bindusara succeeded to the throne of Magadha, Taxila threw off the Maurya yoke and was not, seemingly, brought to submission until the crown prince Ashoka himself appeared before its gates. Ashoka afterwards ruled here as viceroy on behalf of Bindusara, and during his father's and his own lifetime he appears to have maintained the Maurya power throughout the northwest no less efficiently, though perhaps less harshly, than did his grandfather Chandragupta. To him, no doubt, was subsequently due much of the strength which Buddhism gained in this part of India. Soon after Ashoka's death, which occurred about Bactrian the year 231 BCE, the empire of Magadha began to Greeks break up, and Taxila, along with other outlying the hasty conclusion of this peace, by which Seleucus Nictor received only 500 elephants in exchange for so vast a tract of country, was probably due no less to the danger with which he was threatened by Antigonus in the west, than to the unexpectedly strong opposition of Chandragupta, though Solinnaeus must have recognized the impracticability of ever effectively holding the disputed provinces. There is a tradition recorded by Xian Tsang to the effect that Khotan was first colonized by exiles from Taxila, banished by Asoka after the blinding of his son, Kunala. Vinces was able once again to assert her independence, only to fall an easy prey to fresh Greek invaders from Bactria, whom the decline of the Maurya power invited eastward. These invaders were the descendants of the Greek colonies, which Alexander the Great had planted in Bactria, and which, unlike the colonies of the Punjab, had taken firm root and flourished. Thus, although the Macedonians' conquest of the Punjab made no permanent impression upon India, his conquest of the neighboring countries was indirectly responsible for the subsequent establishment of Greek culture and Greek art in the northwest. The first of the Bactrian invaders to reach Taxila was Demetrius, son-in-law of Antiochus the Great, c. 190 BCE, who carried his arms successfully through the Kabul Valley, the Punjab and Sindh. 20 years later came Eucratides, who wrested first Bactria and then part of his Indian possessions, including Taxila, from Demetrius. From these two conquerors there sprang two rival lines of princes, who continued in India the feud which had been started in Bactria, encroaching from time to time upon each other's territories. Among the Greek kings, who ruled over Taxila, Apollodotus and Menander apparently belonged to the house of Demetrius, Antialcidas, to that of Eucratides. Of the many other Greek rulers in the Punjab and northwest, our knowledge at present is too meager to determine which of them ruled at Taxila, and what connection, if any, they had with the one or the other of these two houses. The rule of the Greeks at Taxila had endured for little more than a century, when it was swept away by invading hosts of barbarians from the west. These barbarians were the Scythians or Sakas, as they were known in India, who had long been settled in the Parthian province of Seistan, and had there mingled and intermarried freely with the Parthian elements in the population. From Seistan they overran Arachosia and the neighboring countries and thence passed across the Indus to the conquest of the Punjab. In Arachosia, one section of these invaders remained and established its supremacy under the leadership of a Parthian named Vonones, while another section, under the Saka chief Mawes, pressed eastward and conquered the kingdom of Taxila. Mawes appears to have risen to power in Arachaises about 95 BCE and to have reached Taxila some 10 or 15 years later. He was succeeded in or about 5080 BCE by Azaz Dapshe, who had been intimately associated with the family of Vonones in the government of Arachosia, and was, in fact, perhaps as much a Parthian as a Saka. Though little is known of Azaz, there can be no doubt that his reign was a long and prosperous one, and it is probable that he was responsible for extending and consolidating the Saka power throughout northwest India, as far as the banks of the Humna. In the administration of his dominions, he adopted the old Persian system of government by satraps, which had long been established in the Punjab, and this same system was continued by his successors, Azalises and Azes II, whose local satraps at Taxila and Mathura were also of the Saka race and connected with one another by close family ties. On the death of Azes II, the kingdoms of Taxila and Arachosia were united under one rule by the Parthian Gondophanes, the fame of whose power spread to the Western world, and who figured in early Christian writings as the prince to whose court St. Thomas the Apostle was sent. This union of the two kingdoms took place about the 3rd decade of our era, and may be presumed to have been a peaceful one. After its achievement, Gondophanes proceeded to annex the Kabul Valley, overthrowing the Greek principality in that region, and driving out the last prince Hermachus. But there could have been little cohesion in this empire of Gondophanes, for no sooner had his personal authority been removed than the satraps of the various provinces asserted their own sovereignty. Abdagases, the nephew of Gondophanes, took the western Punjab Orthagnas, and after him Pakores, Arachosia, and Sindh. And other parts of his dominions fell to other princelings, among whom were Sasan, Sapadanes, and Satavastra, whose coins I have discovered for the first time at Taxila. It was during the Indo-Parthian supremacy, probably in the year 44 CE, that Apollonius of Tyans is reputed to have visited Taxila. According to his biographer Philostratus, the king then reigning at Taxila was named Phraortes, who was independent of Vardanes, the Parthian king of Babylon, and himself powerful enough to exercise suzerain power over Liakakuswaka, Petika, Bajuvula, and Sodas. The satrapy of Gandhara. Approaching Taxila from the northwest, Apollonius halted at a temple in front of the wall, which he describes in some detail, and which, as we shall presently see, may possibly be identical with the temple at Jandial. The city itself, Vizimairs, the city of Sirkap, was, he says, about the same size as Nineveh, and fortified like the cities of Greece on a symmetrical plan. The streets were narrow and irregular like the streets of Athens, and the houses had the appearance of being one-storied, but had in reality basement rooms underground. Inside the city was a temple of the sun and a royal palace, the latter of which was distinguished by its simplicity and lack of ostentation, very different from the splendor which Philostratus had seen at the court of Babylon. The credibility of the story of Apollonius as related by Philostratus has been reasonably questioned by modern critics, and there is no doubt that there is much fiction in it mingled with the truth. On the other hand, there is little in the account of Taxila which is not borne out by what we know of the history of those times, while some details find remarkably strong corroboration in my own discoveries. It is a reasonable inference, therefore, that Apollonius did in fact journey as far as Taxila, and that Philostratus had access to the notes of his companion Damis. These it is worthy of remark that Philostratus found it necessary to pay subsidies to the wilder tribes on his frontier in order to keep them quiet. The words tetehiste deximetros are translated by Conibert, fairly well fortified, but this can hardly be the meaning here. Notes were probably correct so far as his own personal observations went, but colored by hearsay stories related to him. And it is likely that other travelers' tales were culled by Apollonius from earlier Greek writers, in order to enliven his narrative. To revert, however, to the history of Taxila, the opportunity of recovering his lost kingdom, which the dismemberment of the Indo-Parthian Empire offered to Hermaeus, was not lost upon him. After being driven from Kabul, he appears to have formed an alliance with Kajula Kadphises, the powerful chief of the Kushans, and with his help to have won back Kabul, and afterwards to have combined with him in the conquest of Gandhara and Taxila. These Kushans were a tribe of the people called by the Chinese historians Yue Qi, who emanated origin ally from the extreme northwest of China. From China they were driven westward about 170 BCE and proceeded to occupy, first, Bactria and the region of the Oxus Valley, then the Kabul Valley, and finally, the plains of northern India. The chronology of this period is very uncertain, but it seems probable that it was about 50 or 60 CE that Kujula Kadphises and Hermaeus wrested the Kabul Valley and Taxila from the Parthians, and a few years later, that Kujula was succeeded by Wima Kadphises, who consolidated and enlarged the empire which his predecessor had won. To about this period belong the coins of the nameless ruler, commonly known as Sota. The Yukchi are commonly known as the Kushans, because it was to the particular Kushan tribe that their kings belonged. Megas, who may have been a successor of Vima Kadphises. Then followed, in the 2nd century of our era, the great and powerful Kanishka, the most famous of all the Kushans, and after him, Huvishka and Vasudeva. Kanishka made his winter capital at Purushapura, the modern Peshawar, and extended his conquests over a wide area, from Central Asia to the borders of Bengal, and it is probable that this empire was maintained intact by his immediate successors. The death of Vasudeva probably occurred in the first half of the 3rd century CE. And from this time forward, the Kushan power gradually declined, though it survived in the Punjab until the invasion of the White Huns or Ephthalites in the 5th century of our era. In the year 400 CE, the Chinese pilgrim Parthian visited the Buddhist monuments at Taxila, but unfortunately has left us no particulars about them. From his accounts of other places in that part of India, however, it is evident that at the time of his pilgrimage, the great Buddhist sanctuaries of the northwest were still relatively vigorous and flourishing. And it is no less evident from the condition in which they have been unearthed that the monuments of Taxila were wantonly and ruthlessly devastated in the course of the same century. This work of destruction is almost destruction, by certainly to be attributed to the hordes of barbarian the White Huns, who after the year 455 CE, swept down into India in ever-increasing numbers, carrying sword and fire wherever they went, and not only possessed themselves of the kingdom of the Kushans, but eventually overthrew the great empire of the Guptas. From this calamity, Taxila never again recovered, and when Xuanzang visited it in the 7th century, he found it had become a dependency of Kashmir, that the local chiefs were at fend with one another, and that most of the monasteries were ruined and desolate. Of the exploration of the remains at Taxila, up to the time when the writer started his operations, there is little to chronicle. Like most ancient sites in this part of India, it was long subjected to the depredations of amateur arachnologists or treasure seekers. Among the former were Major Pierce, Major Crackraft, Deputy Commissioner of Rawalpindi, and Mr. Delmerick. Of the latter, one of the worst offenders was a bista of the village of Shah Deri named Noor, who in the 50s and 60s of last century seems to have made his living by opening small stupas in the neighborhood and disposing of their contents to government officials or antiquity dealers. He it was who discovered an inscribed gold plate in one of the stupas near Jandial and despoiled many other structures of their relics. It was not, however, until 1863, when General Cunningham turned his attention to the site, that its identity with the ancient Taxila was established. This identity, which General Cunningham had first surmised on the strength of the topographical indications afforded by ancient writers, was confirmed by the discovery on the part of some villagers of a stone vase in one of the stupas near Shapur, the inscription on which records that the stupa in question had been erected at Taxila. General Cunningham's own explorations, which were carried out in the cold seasons of 1863-64 and 1872-73, were limited to mere superficial trenches and pits near the northeast corner of the city of Sirkap, and in some of the isolated mounds on Hathil, at Jandial, Mora Malayaran, and Serikipin. The only discoveries of any consequence made by him were two temples of inconsiderable size near the village of Mora Malayaran, one of which was remarkable for the Ioni columns with which it was adorned. The results of these operations are embodied in Jenner and Cunningham's reports for the years 1863-64 and 1872-73. Since the latter date, further spoliation among these historic remains has been effected by neighboring villages, and numerous antiquities from here have found their way into the hands of the dealers of Rawalpindi. In no case has there been any system or purpose other than that of treasure-seeking in these haphazard excavations, nor has any record of them been preserved. Despite the challenges posed by unchecked treasure-seeking and amateur excavations, the early work of General Cunningham marked a turning point in our understanding of Taxila's past. His investigations, though modest in scope, established the city's identity and uncovered architectural remnants that hinted at its cosmopolitan heritage, such as temples with Greek Ionic columns. The observations of travelers like Apollonius, Parthian, and Xuanzang further enriched our picture of Taxila, capturing its enduring importance and eventual decline. Excavations at Taxila over the past 4 winter seasons have revealed invaluable insights into the city's layered past. Drawing upon General Cunningham's early plans and subsequent detailed records, archaeologists have pieced together a chronology of Taxila's major historical milestones. These excavations have uncovered remnants of ancient structures, artifacts, and inscriptions, each offering a glimpse into the city's vibrant eras of Greek, Scythian, Indo-Parthian, and Kushan rule. The findings continue to illuminate Taxila's enduring significance in South Asian history,